Hi, Bailey. Welcome to Autistic Alignment. Bailey is the Manager of Employment Initiatives at the Pacific Autism Family Network, where I work. She's a really great manager and advocate for the autistic community. So I'm really looking forward to having this discussion. Today's topic is a manager's guide to unlocking autistic potential. So, my first question is when talking to managers, is there a specific topic that comes up about their employees?
Yes. Why is my employee not being as productive anymore? Or a month ago, they were doing great and now things are slipping. Or they used to come in at 10:30 and now they're coming in at 10:45 and I've talked to them about it. What do I do? It usually centers around things like that. And the common pattern is just that change. You know, I've talked about this a lot, is like we kind of flip it back on the manager and be like, well, why do you think this change has happened? And usually they're so quick to say, I don't know, they're being difficult or they're being lazy. And we're like 99.99% that is not the case. Probably one of my favorite part of the jobs is like doing that detective work to figure out what's changed in someone's life. Like maybe they moved, they're adjusting to a bus route, or maybe their dog died. Like you never know until you ask those questions. And almost every single time it's something that isn't related to work and it's something that they just need some support through.
So what I'm hearing is there's two things. There's been a change in their employees' productivity, but it's also, and I get this in myself as well, and I notice other autistic people when we're not always communicating what's going on for us. So I really like that point about doing a bit of extra digging to find out what's gone on because maybe they just didn't think that it was even relevant. Do you have any tips in ways that managers could go around doing some of this detective work?
Yes, I always think the best approach is just having straightforward conversation or being a better active listener. So usually I can tell by just office conversations or bringing your team in and seeing what the conversation is. And eventually an employee might say something and you're like, "Oh, that's probably why they're having a rough week." So just being more like welcoming and empathetic and creating a space where people can talk freely about these things, because then you don't even need to ask. Like eventually they'll just find it out. But that is hard. Some managers just aren't open to having that dialogue. And I don't even want to say it's casual because I don't feel like our office is casual, but we are very warm and friends. So we don't even have to have those direct conversations. I don't have to be like, hey, Bob, what's going on in your life? Because I know what's going on in Bob's life. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And something I think that, well, for me as an employee, something you do really good as a manager is I know that I have a tendency to overshare. We're just very open and honest, a lot of us. And so I find that creating a space where we're not judged for having that level of sharing is something I really value in our workplace. So being able to ask people questions and also being open that you might get a very honest response. Is there any tips that you have for building confidence between the autistic staff and managers?
Whenever I see like major conflict and issues in the workplace between neurodivergent staff and their managers or supervisors or whatever, it's a control issue. Like one of the two is trying to hold on to control, where maybe both could let go of some control. I definitely see this in the most in like managers. They want to control start times. They want to control what productivity looks like. They want to control who does what in a role, when oftentimes in most roles that's not necessary. Like you don't have to have that level of control. So as a manager, I think you also help build confidence and empathetic workplace by letting go of that and showing your employees that you're not there to micromanage them. You're not there to nitpick at everything they do. I think that builds an environment where staff are willing to share their experiences, say how their week is going, because they know that if they tell their managers, like, hey, I'm having a rough week because the plumber's at my apartment doing some plumbing, and so it's been freaking me out that someone's in my apartment, they can say those things because their manager is going to be like, all right, work from home this week. And if it's noisy, just reschedule your team's meetings, right? Like instead of being like, you have to make your meetings, you have to do this, it's just too intense for everyone.
People don't like to be controlled. And when we're given more autonomy in the workplace, that builds trust.
Yeah, and I think that's across the board for everyone. I think it's obviously even more important for the neurodivergent community, but like for me too, this is the best job I've ever had. And part of that is because my leadership, my bosses give that same amount of self-determination and autonomy that I can give my team. So the confidence is there. Like I've never gotten in trouble for something. It's been like, try it differently next time. Hey, we all fail, whatever. As long as we didn't do harm, we have a lot of space, which I love.
Do you have any tips for how managers can relinquish control without causing overwhelm in their autistic employees, like by providing too much choice?
Yes. Yeah, because that's definitely a balance. And that's something that I have been struggling with because my nature is to be like, let's just do whatever works. But structure is also very important for productivity and like ease of doing your job. I'd say the first thing is to make a list of the things that are like vital and important and the things that have room for adjustment and just like seeing those things. So like for our team, like the Tuesday teaching classes are something that we have to keep in that area of this is the way we do it. We keep it on this day. But then the thing next to that is, well, sometimes class is 2 hours long. Sometimes it's an hour and 45 minutes, depending on the topic. Who teaches it changes, but we know that Tuesdays, this is what we do. So I think once you make that list, you're able to see the areas that you can relinquish some control and give that autonomy and decision making, self determination to your team members. And maybe this is another tip for managers is leading with that idea of like where are our strengths at and have people play to their strengths. So having knowing that Tuesday is consistent and knowing for us that we're going to be teaching, that teaching part is all of our strengths. Like we love the classroom component. We're really good at it. But then yeah, like doing the things on the other days that aren't our strengths, but we're like learning how to be just helps build confidence. And also along the lines of this whole idea of a strength-based team, I think we're phenomenal at it, knowing what each of us is good at. We have a coworker who is so much more detail-oriented than us. And so like why would we not lean on that and put them in positions and roles and activities that highlight that? Like why would we put ourselves through that? Like when we know, like I know the result is going to be that I forget to at the job fair add a whole time slot. And yeah, I just think I'm so much happier as an employee when we're focusing on what we're good at and then also being challenged, but like more of the focus on what we're good at.
So putting people in their strength-based positions. Oh, so that's, and also it's like reflecting back. That's something you do with me a lot. So how do you recommend managers navigate any internal changes that are happening in the workplace?
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, if someone was at the cafe and they were doing sandwich making and they got confident at it, but then they were transitioning to baristas.
Oh, okay. So if something within someone's role is going to change, and it's not always possible, especially in certain settings, but giving them enough notice and letting your employees continue to do something they're confident in while they're taking on new challenges. Don't take it away from them. We see this a lot as people get really confident in something and then they make one mistake or something out of their control changes and that's stripped away from them. And that really disrupts their sense of autonomy, their confidence in general. So trying to avoid that as much as possible. Or if like you desperately like at a cafe need to pull someone into more of a barista role, maybe letting like always scheduling in that like 10 minutes of food prep that they're really confident in. But yeah, change in the workplace is hard across the board, but yeah, especially I think in the neurodivergent community. Like I see usually a youth thrive on it, but then sometimes it can take some processing later. Like you are like so resilient and like up for a challenge, but then like maybe 5 days later, you're like, oh, that was a lot. And I don't see that as a flaw in any way. Like you will bust your butt And then you're like, I need a day.
My
And
adrenaline,
I
I'm
love that.
like, agree at this. Oh, okay, okay. Um, do you think all the autistic staff are all different communicators or similar communicators?
Different, definitely. But like different, but the response should be very similar, right? Like even if two neurodivergent autistic employees communicate slightly differently, like even if I had a nonverbal employee, I would still approach any scenario the same, empathy, listening, thoughtfulness. So I'd also tell managers, think about like long term, like how can you keep your employees happy so that your team can stay together, because there's 4 or 5 of us who have worked together now for quite some time and we don't have a lot of turnover in our department. I can imagine for autistic employees, if there's like constant changeover within a team, that would be so dysregulating. Like having to inform your manager how you communicate and your team members how you communicate and like through your body language and stuff. Like, I can't imagine that would be so exhausting. It's like, how can you make the workplace look so great that people don't want to leave or people don't feel like they need to leave? Yes, they may need to like move around within a company so that they get new challenges, but like, as long as you have that core,
How do you navigate your emotions when working with a team of autistic people?
yeah, it can definitely be hard. I have to be more aware of my own communication challenges when interacting with someone with direct communication, I find, or yeah, or just a communication style that's totally different than my own. I have to be more hyper aware of where my feelings are and like keep those in check, or else I will respond in a way that's not productive.
This point is great because I think a lot of the time we put that emphasis on autistic people being self-aware, self-regulating. And I really like that as a manager, your tip to other managers is for yourself, look at your
Yes.
own emotions and check your own communication responses because it is so frequently put on autistic people.
Yeah, and we've seen this so many times in different workplaces where it's like we go in and the manager is so convinced that there's something faulty with the employee or like something that we could fix. But then the first thing we notice is like, why are you talking to them like that? And yeah, so it's about reminding them to check your ego, check your control at the door, no matter who your employee is. But it's extra important when you have neurodivergent or people with disabilities in your team and in your workforce, because the consequences of being a bad manager and having a bad workplace are higher for people with disabilities. If you're a crap manager to a neurotypical employee, they'll leave and find another job and they'll likely adjust. If I'm a crap manager to a neurodivergent person, I can ruin their lives for 2, 3 years as they recover from workplace trauma, they recover from burnout, and they have to find a new job. Like it, the it's a lot of like pressure, but like you have to, if you are working in this field, be cognizant of that. Like we see the background of that. That's no, you don't understand. If you're gonna hire and encourage people with neurodiversities to be on your team and apply for that job, be invested. It doesn't mean you let them do a bad job if they're doing a bad job, but you exhaust every option. You support them in any way that they need to make it work, is my perspective, anyways. I have a question for you, Julia. What advice would you give managers, like from your perspective, from like the different jobs you've had?
The thing I would tell managers is that advocating in any situation as an autistic person. I'm sure it's the same for everyone, but it's so draining that someone might be like, oh, well, you didn't push enough for this thing. But it's like so exhausting just doing the first few steps. And it's like almost so like you just don't feel worthy of advocating anyway. And so if someone advocates for something like, for example, with the Calendly thing, the less barriers there are, and you were really great at this because you really pushed for this is like removing all barriers. If I then have to go through and justify verbally all the reasons that I need these things, it's so demoralizing because I don't feel like other people always have to justify their needs in the same way. And so the more managers can like listen and get behind you. And maybe you implement something and it doesn't work, but not view it as a failure. Like we're all still learning to be more self-aware. And so allowing for those failures and being like, okay, we did this a few times, this strategy didn't work, maybe we'll try this. And so like really working together rather than, yeah, like against. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the example of the Calendly because I think this is across the board for all accommodations or job modification adjustments, whatever it be. There's this bit of a backwards approach to it where like the person seeking the accommodation has to come up with the idea of what will work. Then they usually have to ask permission. Then they have to purchase it and then submit a receipt. And there is such a backwards process when it should be like, how can I help you? Or how can you make your job easier or whatever? And then let the manager should take care of it. I'll submit the receipt because the energy, like you said, it could take just to start the conversation, but then you're also requiring people to justify it by submitting a receipt, and those processes are just so hard.
Yeah, it's awkward. But then when you feel like your manager's on your side, like it gives you the confidence to keep going. I think of another tip for managers. Another tip for managers. Oh, when starting a job, don't judge our productivity or how we are at the job initially, because like in our instance, I think it took me a long time to observe, see what's going on, and like once I can visually, and so much work now is done on your computer, so it's hard to see my job. And so once I'm able to like really see the role, it can take me a long time to get into it. But once I get into it and I start developing my confidence, I can be good, but it might just take longer, the first initial steps. So don't be like, oh, I'm going to fire someone. They should be here by now. Yeah, be patient in that.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of measuring productivity is
Mm.
so tricky. Like, obviously, we work in an industry that doesn't put a lot of emphasis on that. So we're like lucky in that sense. But even then, like it's hard for me to understand managers or employers who are like angry that you're not in at a certain time if it's not required, if no one is like counting on you to be somewhere at 9, if you're most productive between 5 and 10 p.m. and you end up like cranking out work and working until 1 in the morning because you're just like in the zone, like why would you not allow that for people? Like to ask them how they measure productivity. Like, what does productivity mean to you? What does it look like to you when you are being most productive? Because then, like, maybe if a manager knows what that's going to look like, they can measure that productivity to that person's, like, their concept of productivity. Yeah. And we see this at the cafe. I feel like all of our trainees are incredible, but no, but they are incredible. And the first few weeks of the cafe, like we see students, they'll miss a shift. They'll struggle those first 2 weeks a bit more. And then after that, it's like they don't even need us. We're just like these weirdos drinking coffee at the cafe because there's nothing for us to do. But like you just have to give people that space to, yeah, figure out what their productivity looks like, what they need, and let people settle into a workplace. Yeah. I love everything that we do. So I'm also like super biased when I'm talking about all this. We're also justice warriors. So I feel like that is how we approach like 90% of our job is with that lens of being like, the world needs to be better. And like, how can us five ladies make this better?
Yeah, and
And
that's what I love about the way that we do it. You're right, because
yeah,
we really implement, we really do focus on what can the managers do to make the environment better for the employee rather than how can the employee be better, because it is about
yeah.
creating that environment.
Yeah. And something that we're like collectively, our team is super triggered by is this concept of the real world. So, like, we hear that all the time. Well, that's not how it is in the real world, or this is the real world. Every second I'm breathing is the real world. So, why, like, just because we are like asking for accommodations and encouraging accommodation doesn't mean that has any impact on the real world. This is the real world. I don't know how to explain it, but it's super, to me anyways, triggering when managers or coworkers say that because sure, it's not like that person's reality, but it's the person with those needs is reality. And then it really invalidates like people's employment and their struggles. And anyways, I find that's something that we're constantly pushing against. Hard to articulate unless you're like in the weeds like us, but it is something that comes up a lot.
Because when they implement them changes, they're having an impact on the real world. And
Yeah.
sometimes that it's used as the reverse as an excuse not to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because why? Like you're holding on to like corporate ideals and standards that are just like not conducive to a post-pandemic and the current world.
Okay, thank you.
Alrighty.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Um,
I appreciate you giving me a platform to talk.